Hello and welcome to Recovery Survey, the podcast where we survey recovering addicts with different backgrounds, different lengths of clean time, and ask them questions about different recovery topics. I'm joined today by Australian Luke Cole. He offers coaching in alcohol-free life. You can find him at lukecole.com.au or on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Hey Luke Cole. Thanks for joining us, Luke.
I was very much looking at trying to jump on and do something like this because, I'm not sure if you've jumped on any of my socials or anything, but, I'm coming into just over a year and 8 months now in sobriety. And in that time, everything for me has shifted. And, I really feel like it's beginning to sort of, all the conversations that I've been having lately, I've felt like this is kind of, I went through all of that, 10 years of struggling with, alcoholism. And I really feel like it's giving me a sense of purpose to be able to help inspire people and actually, bring them to that place that I did and, to be able to welcome the perspective shifts to actually come into a place of sobriety for themselves because a lot of people out there are very much caught. And, for me, for a long time, I didn't know how to get out of it. And it was only when the concept of my own mortality started coming into play that I realized that something needed to happen. And, what needed to happen was, it all had to begin within myself. And, if I can give that gift to anyone, it would give me, a great sense of fulfillment in this crazy world that we live in.
That's part of the reason that I wanted to start this podcast was just to have a way to try to spread that message like you're talking about, like let people know that there's another way to do it, that you don't have to drink or get high every day to deal with life.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's almost empowering when you can get rid of those crutches that you've relied on for so long and come into that place of having a clear mind and, where your decision making isn't sort of filtered through the lens of, an inebriated mind. Cool. So where do you want to start with this one? So I see the topics we have are sort of honesty, open-mindedness and willingness. First, I do want to talk about honesty. Honesty for me very much translates into transparency. And for me, I've found transparency in all aspects of my life have really freed me from a lot of anxiety and stress. I feel like a lot, and I was one of those people that, I had a lot of character faults, but it took me a while to actually begin to accept them as part of me and to be able to express that with no judgment on myself. So for me, it was, I for a long time, I was stuck in the narrative of my past, past traumatic experiences. And with that, I would always play the blame game of this is why I drink and this is why I'm broken, essentially. And it took me a long time to actually absorb that within myself for what it really was. And I guess it was just an excuse to continue to play out that same story, that painful narrative. And when I came into sobriety, I realized that, I had to accept that, and I had to accept that, yes, hey, for a long time, I have had this struggle, this waging war within myself, the duality of mind fighting against each other. And it all just at the end was ego, the person that I had created to deal with this trauma, the person that I created to navigate certain social situations, the person that I created to get me through life, whether it be my working experiences, my job and the people I'd interact with there. And when I began just expressing complete honesty and complete transparency and with complete acceptance of my faults of character, it was like I finally got to take the mask off. that was very, very freeing. I've found the more I can show people that quirky kind of weird side of me, and the more I can express to people that, hey, yes, look, I struggled. I struggled with this, I've struggled with that. And, I found it to be very freeing and I guess you could say liberating. But with complete transparency, I feel like a lot of the anxiety from your life just melts away. But when you take off that mask and accept yourself for who you really are, it allows other people to actually accept you for who you are. See, I've had conversations with some people who are, one person in particular, a bloke that I was working with for a while there. And so this is the hospitality industry, and it's a very, very cutthroat industry, especially when you're working in kitchens. And a lot of people they create this almost caricature of themselves to actually get them through those very, cutthroat situations. And I guess if anyone that knows that's worked in a kitchen, it is very much sink or swim. Unfortunately, causes people, and this is, relatable to a lot of different industries, a lot of different situations. This causes people to put on a mask. This causes people to really create this version of themselves that isn't really them. And this is something that I did. And especially, someone that, coming from a place of social anxiety and not really knowing how to interact with people naturally, it can be very harmful playing out those same scenarios for years consecutively. And so this person that I was working with, I could tell, he's very much stuck in that rampant alcoholism, as it does come with the industry. And we sat down and I came at him with complete transparency of where I was coming from and the things that I had struggled with. This is someone that very much plays this hugely confident type person, but I could tell deep down that they were just hurting, and that's why they were back at the bottle after work, during work even. And when we sat down and had a conversation and I offered him complete transparency of myself, and I made observations about where he was at in his life, he literally came back and was just like, stop reading my mind. What are you doing? And you've never been able to have a conversation like this with another male, have you? And he looked at me and sincerely just said, no. And at that point, we shared a cuddle, an embrace, a big warm hug. And I felt like for the first time in his life, he actually felt like he could take that mask off. He could break down that wall. And for the first time, he had someone that he could really be himself around and show those insecurities and show those character faults without the filter of the ego. And that for me was a very sort of defining point, that when we can be honest with ourselves and completely transparent with ourselves and then be able to express that with other people, it can be such a magical moment where, for like I said, for the first time in his life, he felt, he was offered complete sincerity and was able to express that back. These are the healthiest engagements that we can have. This brings us to a place where we can actually lift each other up and break down those insecurities and really actually get to the core of where these underlying problems or issues, you could say, are coming from. And so with transparency and with honesty with ourselves, with all the people around us, I feel like we can really begin to break down those walls of the ego has constructed for us, or that we've put up by wearing masks in our lives, in the different areas of our lives. I know myself, for a long time, I was putting on different masks for different people, for different situations, for different jobs. And at the end, it just became so exhausting. And I guess this is what, after a day of wearing this mask for a job or for, someone that you might be spending a lot of time with, whether it's a partner or a friend, and not actually being yourself, you get home at the end of the day and your mind is exhausted. You don't know who you are. You don't know what you're doing. And the easiest thing to do is grab a bottle, have a drink, and forget about it. And for me, for a long time, that was the narrative that I was playing, until I was able to begin to make some shifts in my way of thinking. I wasn't able to offer that to anyone. I wasn't able to offer that to myself at all. I guess this is where we come into the concept of open-mindedness. And that is being able to welcome alternating perspectives without judgment, without attachment to any certain idea or belief system or idea of yourself and who you might think you are. I've realized in sobriety that as much as we are all individual and we're all unique, people in a sense are very much the same. When you start to understand the range of personality types and you begin to understand the different ideologies that people really just identify with, it makes interacting with people, I guess, a little easier, because we aren't that different. At the core of things, we all just want to be happy, but it's where we draw our happiness from. And so for me, the biggest shift that happened to actually come into a place of sobriety was that I had to break down myself and begin to actually welcome new ideas. I had to welcome new perspectives into my life. If that shift in thinking didn't occur, then I would still be drinking. For me, it was the concept of my own mortality. And this was after a few incidents which led me into hospital, incidents that happened whilst intoxicated. I was forced into 6 months of essentially bed rest, where I was one-armed and one-legged for quite some time. And being able to just sit for those extended periods of time I couldn't go out, I couldn't party as such. I couldn't continue to play those same destructive sort of events that were just leading to traumatic experiences for myself and for the people around me, the people that cared for me. It was then when I was able to actually look inwards. And if I didn't turn the lens inwards, I wouldn't have been able to actually do the much needed self-analysis to begin to change those perspectives. Or not so much change, but like I said, welcome new perspectives, welcome new ideas about myself. One of the first things that happened was I knew I had to get rid of the I can'ts from my life. A big change for that, coming back to open-mindedness, was that I can, and realizing that myself and a lot of people around me are just stuck in this mindset of scarce thinking. When I realized that there truly is an abundance of happiness and opportunity to be had in this big, strange world, it gave me a sense of motivation. And it was motivation coming from a pure place, as opposed to being motivated for materialistic things and just wanting a bigger paycheck, which unfortunately is very much the structure of our society, with social media and everyone comparing themselves to others. When we can begin to look inwards in a place of deep reflection, we realize that those things aren't really going to make us happy. Those things aren't really going to bring us to a place of fulfillment. We really have to begin to define our needs from our wants. Even when speaking, a lot of people say, I need this thing, or I need a new pair of shoes, or I need to get the new iPhone. Where at the core of that, like, those things might be great, those things might serve you well, but it's serving from a place of ego. At the core, human beings all have a need to feel fulfilled, and things don't fill that hole. I believe that service to others, creativity, passionate projects coming from a place of purpose, I believe those things are what every human being needs. When we begin to actually define our needs from our wants, we find that all of those materialistic things are just wants. If we come back to the things that we really need and begin to define that within ourselves, then that will give us motivation in the right direction. And I guess this is where we can come into willingness, what that really means to ourselves, and especially people that are trying to get sober. What are we willing to sacrifice for sobriety? For me, that was sacrificing the parties. That was sacrificing the nightclubs. All those things were just, the party lifestyle. That was just a want. It was just a want coming from a place of ego that was this fantasy lifestyle that I'd created when I was in my later teens, which I got to see glimmers of. And I've got to see a lot of glamour that I was fantasizing about for so long. Coming into sobriety, I've realized that none of that was glamorous. The drugs and the alcohol and the money, and it wasn't glamorous. It was messy. It was just messy. And so sacrificing those things, those events, maybe, for me, I spoke to someone recently and they said, look, I've got, it was a hens night that was coming up, and, they'd been sober for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and their best friend's hens night was coming up, and they were getting super anxious and super scared about it, saying, oh, look, I don't want to go there, but I don't want to miss out. It's been planned for months. But essentially, these were plans that you did make whilst you were still drinking regularly, and possibly plans that you made whilst drunk. This is, I guess, the perfect example of a sacrifice. Being a year and 8 months sober, I haven't stepped foot in a pub or club. I've missed out on a lot of friends' birthdays. I've just simply had to say no. And this comes back to, I'm sure a lot of people have heard this one, if you hang around the barber's shop for long enough, you're going to get a haircut. And there is so much truth to that saying. If you put yourself in these environments of temptation and these environments where you could be seduced by your old ways of thinking and your old habits, then it's going to be a dangerous environment, and make those sacrifices. You can wish people well without having to share a glass of wine with them. You can wish them well without having to pass out and wake up and forget the fact that you wish them well. Making those sacrifices is important, because going back to that saying, if we continue to hang out at bars and pubs, and we continue to hang out with those people that are still drinking all the time, then that temptation is always going to be there. And I'm not saying like we have to recluse and become a hermit, even though that was what I kind of did for the first 6 to 12 months of my sobriety. I was lucky enough to be living in a rural town that was 3 hours away from where all my friends and family lived. And I didn't have that opportunity to go to these parties and go to these birthdays and be at these events where I would be tempted. It can be liberating to just say no, to just say, look, I'm not willing to put myself in a situation where I could fall back. And until you begin to build that emotional resilience, which does come week after week in sobriety, every month, every few months, it's just that resilience gets more powerful within yourself. And it's not to say that the temptation isn't there, but I'm at a point now where I'm in a relationship with someone and there is a bottle of wine in the fridge, which has been there for a couple of months, which my partner has only just had one glass out of. And of course, she respects the fact that I'm in recovery. And she does ask, like, would you mind if I had a glass? And of course, like, she isn't the type of person that's drinking all the time. For me to be able to sit there now after a year and 8 months of sobriety and watch someone have a glass of wine and not be tempted by the smell and not be tempted by the vision of that wine glass going up to her lips, it's a testimony to that mental and emotional resilience, which, of course, day one, week one, or month one, what wouldn't have been there? You know, I would have most likely crumbled and just sculled half the bottle to myself. It does get easier. And this is an important lesson for people that are trying to get sober or are trying to kick the habit and do feel like they are just stuck, that it does get easier. And you don't have to shy away from social events and things of that nature for the rest of your life. It's not like everything has to change. You know, a lot does, but you can still, in time, enjoy certain things and have that resilience to be able to refrain from actually engaging in those parts of it, the actual drinking side of things. You know, for me, I've never been to a music festival. 28. You know, for me, I would very much love to be able to go and you know, I'm a very musically oriented person, and I would love to go and just be seduced by the music and, you know, completely enveloped in some amazing music of maybe my favorite DJs or whatever it might be, and not actually engage in the drugs and the alcohol, which is very much a big part of the music industry in some respects. But now, you know, after a year and 8 months, I know that that might not be the best place for me to be. You know, I am still optimistic that in time, my emotional and mental resilience will continue to build, and that one day in the next year or couple of years, I would be able to just go to this place and just dance and just enjoy the music for what it is without having to have that filter or that lens of the drugs and the alcohol involved, and not actually be tempted by the hundreds, if not thousands, of people around me, which would be in that altered state. Mental and emotional clarity can be a really, really beautiful thing. And I think the more we experience that, the more our minds do begin to open up, and the more we do begin to actually enjoy the raw nature of life. For me, it's been a beautiful journey so far. I'm just confident at this point with the tools that I have, and which these are only tools that I started being able to equip myself with after that first day of sobriety. I do believe that I will be able to come into a place where I can interact with every part of society without the temptation. And one of the gifts of recovery, so to speak, the clear mind, the clear head, and the emotional resilience. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Luke, for coming on and sharing part of your story with us. Once again, you can find him at lukecole.com.au or on social media at HeyLukeCole. Thanks again for listening to Recovery Survey. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider leaving us a rating or a review, and please be sure to tell your friends about us. If you'd like to get in contact with us, we have a brand new website. It's recoverysurvey.com. Until next time, I've been your host, Brett. Thanks for listening.